It was Christmas morning, the kind of morning where every detail feels etched into your memory forever. Not because of joy, but because of the sting that never quite leaves your chest. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen, wrapping. Paper crinkled in the corner, and my sister squealed with excitement as a set of car keys landed in her perfectly manicured hands. My mom's voice trembling with pride as she walked her out to the driveway where a brand new $50,000 box glittering in the pale winter sunlight, the metallic paint catching every shard of light like it was made for her. The golden child. While I sat cross-legged on the carpet waiting, trying to quiet the small voice inside me that already knew whatever was coming next wasn't going to measure up. And sure enough, my mom's hand reached into her oversized bag, pulled out a tiny piggy bank wrapped in crinkled red paper, and placed it on my lap with a half smile, my sister's laughter echoing in the background. And when I opened it, inside was a $1 bill folded once over, sitting alone like some cruel joke. And in that moment, my throat burned. Not from tears, because I refused to give her that, but from the sheer weight of being told in front of everyone exactly how little I mattered. And still, I smiled, because if I let them see me break, they would win. And I decided right then that this was not the end of my story. This was only the beginning of theirs unraveling. They all thought my smile meant I accepted my place, that I would keep playing the role they had written for me years ago, the background daughter, the one who was supposed to clap when my sister's name was called, nod when she strutted into a room, carry boxes when she moved into her dorm at a private college I could never afford. They had trained me well to play quiet, to swallow resentment, to be grateful for scraps. And I had gone along because fighting back only earned me lectures about gratitude and family. But that morning, something in me shifted, because while my sister twirled the keys on her finger like a trophy, and my mother filmed her walking circles around the shiny new car in the driveway, I was left holding a piggy bank worth less than the gas it would take to start that BMW, and the truth was, they weren't even ashamed. They didn't whisper, they didn't glance nervously at me, they didn't even pretend. They just looked through me like my feelings weren't even part of the equation, like I was a placeholder at their holiday table. And maybe once that would have broken me, but instead I felt a quiet click in my chest, like a lock turning, because if they thought that was the last chapter, they had no idea who they had just pushed to the edge. And when the laughter subsided and my sister drove off for a test run, when the cameras were lowered and the house fell quiet, I excused myself and walked upstairs, not to cry, but to start writing down every single thing I had ever done. Every receipt, every sacrifice, every time they had leaned on me financially or emotionally, the years of babysitting, tutoring, groceries bought with my part-time job, utilities covered when mom's card declined, and I began stacking it like evidence, not for them, but for me, because one day soon I knew I was going to need a record. And while they thought they had broken me with $1, what they really did was fund the start of my revenge, because the next time they underestimated me, they would lose far more than they ever gave. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night with the little piggy bank still in my lap, the ridiculous thing shaped like a cartoon animal, glossy and childish, as if I was still the 8-year-old girl who once thought her mom would one day be proud of her, and I turned it over in my hands, listening to the $1 bill shuffle around inside, a sound so empty it almost mocked me. And instead of crying, I opened my laptop and began digging through old folders, bank statements, text messages, all the evidence of years of being the invisible backbone of this family, the times when my mom had called me at 2 a.m. to transfer money to her account because she couldn't cover the mortgage payment, the months I skipped meals at college so I could send my sister money for books because mom claimed she was too stressed to handle it, the vacations they all took without me but expected me to house sit and take care of the dog, and every single act I had brushed off as love or duty now looked different under the harsh light of betrayal. And the further I scrolled, the heavier my chest grew, because the pattern was undeniable. I had been their safety net for years, and in return, they had given me nothing but reminders of how little I was worth in their eyes. And as I pieced together this timeline, I started to realize I wasn't crazy, I wasn't dramatic, I wasn't ungrateful, I was used, and the gift of that stupid piggy bank was nothing more than the mask slipping, their way of saying out loud what they had always believed, in private. And with that realization came an odd kind of clarity, a calm resolve that washed over me, because I knew I couldn't keep living in this cycle. I couldn't keep being their unpaid servant while they showered my sister with Bmws and vacations and praise. So, I made a decision that night, not out of spite, but out of survival. I was going to start setting boundaries they couldn't ignore. And if that meant cutting myself out of their perfect little holiday pictures, so be it, because I was done smiling while they handed me scraps. And I swore silently to myself that the next holiday would not look the same. They would not get to humiliate me in front of family and friends and think I'd quietly take it. I was going to rewrite the script they had given me, and for the first time in years. The thought made me smile for real. The days after Christmas were like walking through a fog, my phone buzzing with group messages where my mom bragged about my sister's new car, sending photos of her posing in front of it with captions like, "So proud of my girl, she deserves the world." And I scrolled in silence, unseen and unmentioned. Not a single photo of me at that tree or a note about the piggy bank. It was as if I hadn't even been there, and I realized that's exactly how they wanted it. They wanted me invisible, but invisibility can be a weapon if you know how to use it. And I started small, pulling back in ways they didn't immediately notice. I stopped answering my sister's calls when she wanted free rides to her internship. I didn't rush to my mom's aid when her Wi-Fi went out, and she wanted me to fix it. I let their messages sit unread while I focused on building my own escape plan. And in that silence, I started to see how fragile their world really was, how dependent it had quietly become on me doing all the background work. Because without me, they scrambled, they panicked, they complained, and though they didn't thank me before, they noticed my absence now, which was proof that I had always mattered more than they let on. But I wasn't about to return and rescue them. No, I was learning how to redirect my energy, pouring my time into work, building my savings, quietly researching opportunities they never thought I'd reach for, and every time I added another dollar to my account, I thought about that lonely bill inside the piggy bank, how they had meant it to diminish me, but how it had become my reminder that money, independence, and choices were power. And the more I built mine, the closer I felt to finally stepping out of their shadow, because what they didn't realize was that neglect can create resilience. And one day, the same family who thought they could buy my silence with a single dollar would learn just how costly it was to underestimate me. By February, my sister had already dented the mow, a careless scrape against a parking lot pillar while she was on her phone, and my mom rushed to cover the repair bill without hesitation, posting about how accidents happen and we love her no matter what. While I quietly paid my own rent in full with money I had earned working double shifts, no posts, no applause, no spotlight, just survival, and for the first time, I started to see the difference not as a wound, but as leverage. Because while they were busy teaching her that mistakes had no consequences, I was learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, how to make choices and live with them, and the more I leaned into that, the stronger I became. Though they didn't notice it yet, they still believed I was the small child smiling with a piggy bank. But I wasn't anymore. I was planning, collecting, keeping quiet, but never still. And then one afternoon, while sorting through old files on my laptop, I stumbled onto something that made my pulse race. A folder I had scanned years ago when I handled paperwork for my mom during one of her too busy phases. Inside were tax forms, bank statements, even loan documents. And I realized I had access to more than just memories of their neglect. I had receipts of their actual finances, evidence of just how much they had leaned on me while pretending otherwise, how many bills I had paid that had mysteriously been filed under my mom's name, how often she had covered up gaps with temporary help that turned out to be my own transfers. And for a moment, anger surged so hot I could barely breathe, because they had not only used me emotionally, but financially, all while claiming I should be grateful for a single dollar. And though I shut the laptop and sat in silence, I knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. I had been collecting my story piece by piece, and now I held something even stronger. Proof that they weren't the generous parents they pretended to be, and that one day when I decided to, I could show the world exactly who they really were. Spring came, and with it my mother's annual tradition of hosting a big Easter brunch, the kind where she invited distant relatives, neighbors, even her church friends, the kind where she played the perfect hostess, and my sister played the perfect daughter. But this year I declined the invitation with a simple text: "I won't be attending. And the silence that followed from her end was deafening. No barrage of guilt, no calls begging me to reconsider, just silence, which told me more than words ever could, because she didn't want me there unless I played my assigned role, smiling, serving, fading into the background while she paraded. My sister's new car in the driveway like a prize. But without me, the edges of her performance began to fray. I heard later from a cousin that the brunch was a disaster, the food overcooked, my sister sulking because no one complimented her. Dress. My mom snapping at guests because things weren't perfect. And for the first time, I realized that my presence had always been the glue, the quiet worker in the background who made their show look seamless. And now that I had stepped away, the cracks were visible to everyone. And though part of me still ached at being cut out so easily, another part of me felt a grim satisfaction because they were finally experiencing life without me smoothing the rough edges. And while they scrambled, I was busy building a life where I wasn't their shadow. I picked up freelance work, took on projects that challenged me, built connections with people who saw me as more than the invisible daughter, and every new paycheck, every new opportunity, reminded me that my future wasn't tied to their table or their judgment. And late at night, when doubt crept in, I would open the folder of receipts and statements I had kept and remind myself of the truth, that I had been the backbone for years. And now I was the one walking away with the strength, while they sat in their crumbling house of favoritism, still believing the world revolved around a BMW and a single child who had never learned how to stand without someone else holding her. Up. By summer, my sister was bragging on social media about weekend getaways, spa retreats, and designer handbags, every post captioned with something like "blessed" or "hard work pays off," though everyone in our circle knew she hadn't worked a single consistent job in her life, and the comments from relatives poured in, hearts and praise, while my name was never mentioned, not even once, as if I didn't exist. And yet quietly, behind the scenes, I was finally saving enough to put down the deposit on my own place, a small apartment with creaky floors and peeling paint. But it was mine, and the first night I slept there, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, because there was no competition, no spotlight stolen, no piggy bank meant to humiliate me, just silence, my silence, the kind that healed instead of hurt. And in that space, I started to grow, decorating it with my own style, choosing furniture that matched my taste, not theirs, cooking meals that filled my kitchen with warmth, and every choice reminded me that independence was my greatest gift, not the things my mother dangled in front of my sister. And yet, I didn't sever the cord completely. I stayed in the group chats, answered just enough to keep the peace, because I knew patience was power, and one day that patience would pay off. And then in July, out of nowhere, my mom called me in a panic, her voice trembling. She said she needed me to come over immediately, that it was urgent. And when I arrived, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere, bank notices, overdue bills, loan reminders, all the things she had been hiding behind her picture-perfect facade. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes like I was supposed to swoop in and save her the way I always had. And in that moment, the old me would have, the daughter desperate for scraps of approval. But this time I didn't move. I just stood, there with the piggy bank image burned into my memory, and I realized she had trained me for this moment. She had taught me what it felt like to be discarded, and now she was about to learn what it felt like to be left behind. She pushed the papers toward me, whispering about how the bank was threatening foreclosure, how my sister's tuition payments had drained her accounts, how the car insurance was sky high after the accident, and she begged me to just help out, just this once, her voice quivering like I hadn't heard the same plea 100 times before. But this time something was different, because I had my own place now, my own bills, my own future to protect. And I wasn't about to let her drag me back into the role of savior, so I calmly told her I couldn't do it, that I had my own responsibilities, and the look on her face shifted. From desperation to disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend a world where I said no, but I meant it, every syllable, and when she snapped that family helps each other, I almost laughed, because I remembered that Christmas morning when family had given me $1 and a plastic pig while she handed my sister a $50,000 car, and I said quietly, family doesn't treat one child like gold and the other like dirt. And the silence that followed was heavy, a silence where the truth finally hung. In the air, undeniable. And though she tried to guilt me, to cry, to accuse me of being heartless, I didn't budge because I knew the second I caved, I'd lose everything I had built, and walking out of that kitchen, leaving her sitting in the mess she created, was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it was also the freest. Because I realized then that I wasn't her safety net anymore. I wasn't their quiet shadow. I was someone who could finally choose herself over their chaos. My phone didn't stop buzzing for days after that. First with long paragraphs from my mom about how she had done her best and how I owed her for raising me. Then with short, sharp texts from my sister dripping with entitlement. If you don't help her, we'll lose the house. Do you even care? And then later, you're jealous because mom finally gave me something nice. And I stared at the screen with a calm I never thought I'd feel, because years ago those words would have cut me open. They would have sent me spiraling into shame and self-doubt, but not anymore. Now they just sounded like noise from people who had built their lives on my silence. And I wasn't silent anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I just let them watch as their world began to wobble without me propping it up. And the irony was, they had always believed I was the weak one, the disposable one. But in reality, I was the one holding everything together. And when I stepped away, the picture-perfect family crumbled like cheap glass. Word spread among relatives faster than I expected. Whispers about how mom had overextended. How the BMW was a terrible financial decision, how the house was in trouble, and for once I didn't rush to correct the story or protect her reputation. I let people talk, because for years she had spun narratives that made me invisible, and now her own choices were doing the talking, exposing her without me lifting a finger. And in my quiet apartment, I sat with a cup of tea at night, scrolling through those frantic messages, realizing that the same people who thought I was worthless were now desperate for the worth I had built on my own. And every unanswered text, every call I declined, was me taking back pieces of myself they had stolen. And when my cousin reached out to say, "I had no idea it was this bad for you all those years. I'm sorry," I felt seen in a way I never had at that family table. And it struck me that my revenge wasn't about grand gestures or public scenes. It was about this quiet, undeniable truth. They needed me more than I ever needed them, and now I finally had the power to walk away and let them face the emptiness they had created. By autumn, the cracks had widened into chasms. My sister's BMW was repossessed after she stopped making the insurance and loan payments my mom had originally promised to cover, and the perfect image she had curated online collapsed overnight. Her feed went silent. Friends whispered about how she was borrowing rides and avoiding parties because she couldn't bear the embarrassment. While my mom grew more frantic, calling relatives she had once looked down on, asking for loans, selling off jewelry she used to flaunt at church, and I heard about all of it secondhand, because by then I had cut off direct contact. I had blocked their numbers after one too many guilt-laden voicemails, and instead I focused on myself, on late nights working toward a promotion, on classes I had enrolled in to finally finish the degree I had put off when I was too busy carrying their burdens. And I started to thrive in ways that felt almost surreal. I found a community of friends who didn't see me as background, who showed up to celebrate my wins, who asked how I was doing, and meant it. And little by little, the hollow ache I had carried for years began to fill with something else. Freedom. The kind I had never tasted while trapped under their expectations. And though sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if I should feel guilty watching them struggle, the answer came easily when I remembered that Christmas morning, that Piggy. Bank with its $1, that laugh echoing as my sister drove off in her BMW, and I knew with certainty that I owed them nothing, because they had taught me with their actions exactly how much I was worth to them, and all I was doing now was returning the lesson in kind. Winter came again, a full year since the morning that had burned itself into my memory. And while my mom's house looked the same from the outside, wreath on the door, lights strung across the roof, inside it was different, quieter, emptier. Relatives no longer flocked to her gatherings. My sister no longer bragged about gifts or trips, and when photos surfaced online of their Christmas this time, it was just the two of them at a modest dinner table. No piles of presents, no shiny new car in the driveway, just forced smiles and dim light. And I couldn't help but notice the absence of joy, the hollowness that money used to patch over now glaring in every corner. While across town in my small apartment, I decorated my own tree with ornaments I had chosen myself, gifts for friends I had bought with my own money wrapped neatly beneath it, laughter filling the space as people who truly valued me crowded around the table, and the contrast couldn't have been sharper because I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the woman who had walked away from the script written for her and authored her own life. And though I knew my mom probably sat that night convincing herself I had betrayed her, or that one day I'd come crawling back, I also knew the truth. There was no going back, not after the clarity I had gained, not after the peace I had built. And when I looked at the little piggy bank I had kept all year, still with its single folded dollar inside, I finally smiled for real. Not out of defiance or pain, but out of recognition, because that dollar was the most valuable gift they had ever given me, not for what it was, but for what it showed me. A mirror reflecting the truth and the strength to never again accept less than I deserved. The following spring, I was promoted at work, the kind of promotion that came with a real salary, health benefits, and the stability I had been craving for years. And when I signed the paperwork, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to that girl on the carpet with a piggy bank in her lap, humiliated in front of her family. And the pride that welled up in me wasn't loud or boastful. It was steady, solid, the kind of pride that comes from surviving storms alone and still finding a way to grow. And as I settled deeper into my independence, I noticed how the distance between me and my family had shifted. No longer was I checking their social media or waiting for some acknowledgement. Instead, relatives came to me quietly, one by one, telling me they admired how I had built myself up, how they saw now the favoritism that had been there all along, how they regretted not speaking up when I was sidelined. And hearing those words didn't erase the past, but it did validate what I had always known, that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't imagining the imbalance. I had been living it in real time, and finally others could see it too. Meanwhile, my mom's calls had dried up. No more pleas for money, no more manipulative guilt trips, only silence. A silence that told me she had realized I wasn't coming back to play the role of rescuer. And my sister, once the golden child, now floated from job to job, each one shorter than the last. The safety net gone, the shine of her BMW days faded into something dull and brittle. And when I saw her by chance one afternoon in a store parking lot, her hair unkempt, her face drawn, she looked at me with something I had never seen before. Not disdain, not superiority, but envy, raw and sharp. And in that moment, I understood fully what they had lost. They hadn't just lost my labor or my money. They had lost access to me, to my strength, to the daughter who had carried them quietly for years, and without me, their world had shrunk, while mine had expanded. And walking away that day, I felt no urge to gloat, no need to prove a point, because the proof was in our lives, hers unraveling and mine flourishing, and that was the most profound revenge of all. The kind that doesn't require shouting or spectacle, only patience, boundaries, and the courage to choose yourself over people who never chose you. A year later, I stood in my own living room, sunlight streaming through windows I had paid for with my own rent, shelves lined with books I had chosen, walls decorated with photos of people who truly loved me, and for the first time in my life, the space felt like home, not because it was grand or perfect, but because it was mine, built without their approval, sustained without their scraps. And as I looked around, I realized I no longer carried the constant ache of needing their validation. I no longer flinched at family holidays or dreaded the comparisons. I was free, and in that freedom I found peace so deep it almost startled me, because I had spent so many years believing I'd never get it, that I'd always be the forgotten daughter with $1 in a piggy bank. But now I knew better. Now I understood that their cruelty had been my catalyst, that the humiliation they thought would silence me had instead lit a fire that pushed me into independence. And when I occasionally heard about them, about my mom downsizing, about my sister drifting without direction, I didn't feel bitterness, only distance, because their world was no longer mine to carry. And the revenge wasn't in watching them struggle. It was in refusing to let their choices define me, in proving to myself that I was worth more than their favoritism ever allowed me to believe, And sometimes at night, when I opened my drawer and saw that ridiculous little piggy bank with its single folded dollar, I smiled. Not the strained smile of survival, but a real one. Because what was meant to belittle me had become my reminder of strength, a symbol of everything I had overcome. And if anyone asked me what I learned from it all, I would tell them this. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not in striking back, but in stepping out of the shadows they built for you, creating a life so full and steady that their absence is not a wound but a gift. And when I close my door at night, knowing I'm free of their control, I feel something they may never know. Contentment, earned, unshakable, mine forever.